So let's think about what increases the risk of PTSD in our service members. What will cause this uniqueness that they develop and have to work with? So the research that we did found that there are certain factors that will make it more likely that service members and eventually veterans will develop PTSD. For example, the longer the deployment time. So the longer they're gone from home, then the more symptoms will be developed. The more that they might compensate with substance use. Deployment to forward areas. What we mean by that, the closer they are to battle. And so depending on how close they are to, the actual scenario that's going on. Seeing other people wounded or killed. So a few years ago, I had a Vietnam veteran come in to see me with some pretty severe symptoms. And so we had the best conversations. At first, he didn't want to talk at all about his history. And so in the way that I do that, I said, okay, we can talk about something else. And so, I said, eventually we're going to have to address, what happened in Vietnam. I said, now you're in a safe atmosphere, you're in a safe place, and we can talk about it. So as time went on, finally, he said, well, what happened was we were in a Huey and a helicopter, and my friend was chopped up next to me, and I got out alive. And he said, the only way, please hear me carefully, think with me about a Vietnam veteran who's now in his 70s. And he said to me, he said, Paul, the only way I can keep my friend's memory alive is to replay that every day. So I replay that movie. Remember the movie? Remember the binge watching? What have you been binge watching lately? What's your favorite binge watch? Here is a Vietnam veteran who's in the later years of his life, and still every day he binge watches that movie. Every day he goes through that. Every day he plays through that. All of the blood, all of the gore, all of the everything that was, and he does it for one purpose. He says, that's the way I keep my buddy's memory alive. Now, to some people, that may seem a little bizarre. Some may not agree with that, but it was what made sense to him. So here was my question for my friend. If your friend were sitting here from Vietnam, if he were sitting next to you on the couch, and you were to ask him, is this the way you want me to keep your memory alive? What do you think he would say? And this gristly, tough old guy bowed his head and sobbed, said, he wouldn't want me to do that. I don't have to do it anymore. That was a major breakthrough for him. And so when you've seen other people wounded and killed right in front of you, that does something to a person. And for him particularly, when he had figured out in his own mind, this is the only way I can keep my friend alive, his memory alive, when he realized that that wasn't working, it was ruining him, and he'd been doing this for all these years. He said, why didn't I come here sooner? I said, yeah. So when our people have seen other people, when they've had severe injury themselves, and they've seen severe injuries, and of course the pinnacle or the worst of that will be a traumatic brain injury when someone has something that cannot be healed and therapeutically fixed through either science, medicine, or surgery. They just have to deal with the lack of whatever that might be with a traumatic brain injury. Now, what increases the risk of PTSD in our service members? We mentioned before, maybe a lack of education, maybe a lack of their understanding. Well, we find that lower rank, a lower level of education, schooling, low morale, or poor social support, I would underline and circle that. Is that those who have a low morale and they're not able to deal with their stress internally with the people around them. If they're single, that's a factor. Family problems at home. So I dealt many years, once again, these are composite stories. They're never exactly what's happened. A young man showed up. He had been to Afghanistan in one of these countries and wars. He was in a convoy and they had gone around some areas and they hit a bomb, and the Humvee went right into a crater, and his shoulder and his right leg were just destroyed. They were just all torn up. So they got him out. They survived. He felt, really had some survivor's remorse that he wasn't killed like some of his friends. They get him to the base in Germany for him to get rehab and for him to do a lot of surgeries. So finally he calls home. And so he gets a call into his home and he talks to his mother and he tells his mother what's happening. She says, I told you not to join the military. I told you not to go over there. I knew something like that. So rather than her comforting him, she just went off on him about how stupid he is. And of course, then his interpretation of that is, man, I'm an idiot. You told me not to go. I went anyway. I'm an idiot. And what you predicted is what happened. Unfortunately, family problems can be greatly exaggerated when someone goes through PTSD or some of these experiences. Things that were latent become big problems through these experiences they have. If they're a member of the National Guard or Reserves, they may not feel like they've been as prepared as well as some of the others. Prior trauma exposure. This is what I call linking. And so linking is when I've had trauma in my life 4 or 5 times. This current trauma links me back to all the others because there's a commonality. And so if I've had prior trauma exposure, I may feel like in each one of those traumas, I wasn't good enough. I didn't do my job right. I should have tried harder. Whatever my life's message becomes, then it can come from that prior trauma exposure. And then females experience PTSD differently than males. So these environmental stressors, including post-deployment reintegration challenges. So here our veteran partner has gone out on deployment for 6 months, maybe a year. Now they come back. They now are veterans. They've gotten out of the military. And what we find now is they don't have a job. They don't know where to work. Life is going to be it becomes a big challenge. They find that there is a lot of hard work at reintegrating back into society, especially if they don't feel like that they're getting the support that they need and that they're not getting the help that they really need. And there is a lot of help needed. We'll get to some of the issues that we find with VA eventually. The onset of substance use disorder can emerge as a secondary. Remember, we said it might be just the symptom of what's going on. And so what happens is it's a secondary issue to another mental health problem associated with the stressors: PTSD, depression, severe anxiety. Most often anxiety is linked with a great sense of fear. If you can see the picture here, then you look at that carefully, fearful, trouble sleeping, shame, flashbacks, nightmares, helplessness, feeling guilty and abandoned, feeling nervous about the future or about their personal safety. In other words, substance use disorder is most often a symptom of much deeper problems. So if you would put into the Q&A, agree or disagree that substance use disorder is most often a symptom of much deeper problems. If you'll throw that into the Q&A or however you might be able to do that, your response to that and what you think. So with the studies that we've done, the most common denominator with deployment, with reintegration, okay, people are putting in the chat that they agree. Okay, deployments, reintegration, and then PTSD. So in the Q&A, often a symptom, not each time, but often, exactly right, yes. They are a symptom. If you look at a tree, if that tree has leaves that are dry and falling off and withering, right? And you cut off the dry limbs and you just leave it to itself, and then it dies. It might very well be because you've treated the symptoms, the leaves, but you've never opened up the ground and looked at the roots and found maybe the roots were rotted. Maybe they were waterbound. Maybe they need nutrients that are not in the soil. And so what has to happen is we go down to the roots, we bring the atmosphere of healing to the roots, and then in the next season, there should be leaves and fruit. That's the philosophy. Well, stress and anger management stop any of that process. When a person is stressed beyond degree, when they're angry beyond compare, then it will stop the process of healing, of therapeutic work, that anger that is seething in the background that they're holding on to. Now, let me say this. The purpose for that anger may very well be that it's a survival mode. They are fighting their way to survive. And what will happen with the stress level, what will happen with that anger level is it will get so overwhelming and insurmountable that the person is going to find some way to relieve it. And quite often, the way to relieve it, because it works, is alcohol, marijuana, fentanyl, ecstasy drugs, things like that. Because what happens is they do what they do. If a person's feeling overwhelmed and stressed and angry, and they drink and drink, that feeling goes away for a while. They just have to come back to it the next day, right? And so what we find is that if we don't deal with the stress and anger issues that our clients have, there may be a superficial recovery, but it won't be complete. Now, if you agree with that, let's put that in the Q&A, or if you have any questions about it, feel free to put that also in the Q&A. So far, we have a lot of people that agree with what we're saying. Listen, please hear me. If it's the missing link in many of these experiences that our active duty and veterans live day to day, why don't we address stress and anger management? And if we can teach our clientele to deal with stress properly, to deal with anger properly, then these other symptoms that they may have will either be manageable or hopefully would even go away. Now, I may be seriously, idealistic, but I have seen this happen for people, and I believe it can work.